Hey guys, let's talk about American education that apparently is terrible. Now, let me get this out of the way. The information I'm going to cite comes from the World Population Review, a data aggregate website. So the big talk now is dismantling the Department of Education, and there's a lot of narratives that go along with why the Department of Education should be dismantled. But one of the things that keeps getting repeated over and over again is we want to hand education back to the states. Now, right away, when someone starts out with that statement, don't believe anything they say following that, because at the federal level, they actually don't determine state curriculums. That's already in the hand of the states. States individually determine their education curriculum. What the Department of Education will do is make suggestions and also give supplemental funding for schools. It's something I'm going to come back to, right? So that right away just completely ignore that statement. Now, actually, the irony is that there is a threat saying that if school systems don't do away with their DEI or inclusion programs or whatever it's supposed to be, they're going to cut the funding. Now, the reason I say whatever it's supposed to be is because they haven't actually given them any type of directive with that. They've been very vague, saying whatever DEI is. So they're saying we're going to cut your money if you do this thing that we really haven't told you what we want you to do. How is this going to impact the states? Well, because we don't have a federal education system, it affects every state a little differently. New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts, I think the funding for these states is about 10%. About 10% of their funding comes from the federal government. And I think these states also tend to run surpluses, so they could probably eat some of the costs. While other states like Mississippi, Arkansas, a lot of the red rural states, let's keep it a buck, they get some of their fundings up to 25 to 30% from the federal government. So they can be greatly impacted by that. I think this is really just trying to bully the wealthier blue states, which is funny because, well, they're wealthy. They can kind of take the punch a little better, right? So if anybody's really trying to affect the education standards of the state, it's actually the new administration. Now, ask yourself, are our schools that bad? Are American schools really that bad? Because it's just a thing we say, it's a tautology. We don't really question it. Well, I was looking at the school rankings, the world school rankings, and the U.S. is about 33, which is pretty low on the list. But unless you have kind of saying like marginally how bad that is, well, I think the most disturbing thing about that is the fact that there are other countries which are much, I don't want to say poor, but not as financially well off as we are, that rank higher than us. Lithuania, Estonia. I think Slovenia was actually one of the top 5 schools, which, by the way, South Korea in 2024, I believe, was number 1. I think it takes in consideration things like literacy and educational attainment. One country that's constantly pointed to is Finland. And how good is Finnish schools? Well, how good are Finnish schools? Finland ranked in this list number 7. And I think the thing about Finland is that it consistently ranks in the top 10. So even though it's not number 1 all the time, it's consistently ranked in the top 10 of schools. So you would think that if you're looking at a system, the Finnish school system, for example, and you're constantly saying how good they do, because like I said, Finland gets brought up all the time, you want to emulate Finland. Well, I can tell you we don't. First of all, the Finnish education system is centralized. That's the first thing. Then people will make the arguments, well, you can't really do like the Finns do because demographically they're different. That's very true. It's a much more homogenous society, but at the same time, they do have actually a pretty decent number, if I remember, like the other Scandinavian countries. I think I can say Scandinavian, even though they're not Germanic. They are the Scandinavian countries. Like the other Scandinavian countries, they do have a number of immigrants and migrants living there. Maybe that's not really the point. Let me continue. So, how well does our system reflect, I guess, resemble Finland? Well, here's some things about the Finnish school system. Number 1, Finnish kids don't start school until they're 7. And then they only have to go to school for 9 years. So with that 9 years, they start later, and it's a much more efficient system. I honestly think that one of the reasons we start kids at the age we do is because, well, everybody's supposed to work and you need somebody to take care of your kid. Capitalism rules everything around us. Cream, get the money, right? So that's the first thing. The other thing is how they view teachers. I don't know how you see a teacher. I don't think Americans in general view teachers as they really are. Teachers are professionals. They're professionals much like doctors, lawyers, dentists. A teacher goes to school to learn to teach. So when you have a science and English teacher, it wasn't that they took a bunch of English classes, which they did, but they took a bunch of education classes, and specifically education at the grade level, more times than not the grade level at which they're teaching. This is a contrast to a college professor or instructor like I am, where I never took a single education class. All we do at best is maybe take some seminars. All my classes were in mathematics. I actually, as an undergrad, once had the opportunity to take an education and math class, but I dropped out of it after 2 weeks because I thought it was boring. So treat these people like the professionals they are, but we don't really view teachers like that. In fact, I think there's often an antagonistic, disrespectful attitude towards teachers, and I think that's reflecting in the pay. So hear me out. Check this. So having someone of equivalent education and experience in the United States, meaning let's say you have a person who's a teacher in the United States with a bachelor's degree like you minimally have to have with 6 years of experience, their peers, they will make on average 58% of what their peers make. That's across the board. So if you have a teacher with 20-something years of experience, a master's degree, or a specialist degree, they're going to make about 58% of what their peers make with the equivalent education years of experience. What does this compare with Finland? Well, with Finland, this is going to be at the lower grade levels about 70 to 75% of what their peers make. And at the upper grade levels, the equivalent of high school, it's going to be between 90 and 95%. We can say this because, once again, the Finnish schools are uniform. So just reflected in the pay of teachers, they're clearly more respected than American teachers, at least just looking at pay alone. The other thing is how they handle education after the mandatory schooling. So, and I say this I would say it's something that started happening when I was in high school. That was basically the pipeline of, maybe the word isn't pipeline what I'm looking for. I'm trying to think of the word, but basically getting rid of vocational programs. It used to be for a lot of schools, you could get a college prep seal or a vocation prep seal, meaning that you were after high school, you were going to go work on a vocation, or you're going to go to college. And the curriculum at the high school was different for that. If you were going to do a vocation, you may take shop, you may take metal work. If you were going to college prep, you would probably take more math classes, and you'd have to do the mandatory 2 years of a foreign language. That's something that's going to probably get to a lot of the foreign viewers of my videos, which I usually have. Yes, in the United States, we only have to take 2 years of a foreign language, and that's why Americans only speak English for the most part. So, yeah, that's it. So if you really were wanting to improve education and you kept pointing to a country saying you should be more like that country, then you figure we would look at Finland, because they love to bring up Finland, and try to be more like Finland. Fund the schools better, maybe have more of a centralized curriculum, or at least give more guidance to the curriculum. But we, in fact, do the exact opposite. The ultimate plan is to privatize all of this so you can funnel public money into private pockets. And don't worry, rich people, their children will always be educated well. Meanwhile, people who rely on public schooling, the commoners, your kids are going to get probably a poor product costing your state more. Because let's be honest, most of these people making these decisions, they don't send their kids to public school anyway. They've never stepped foot in a public school. How funny is that anyway, that all these people making these decisions, not only have they never sent their kids to a public school, but they've never been in a public school. Just like so many things, when it comes to education, for the most part, I'd say the United States is kind of cooked. But hey, at least I don't have kids.